And I want to start by talking about the local, because it's half this fight, and it's the half where in many ways my heart is. If chances, a glass of water when I'm sorry, apologies. If we started to do the things that we should be doing as a matter of national policy and international policy, make fossil fuel more expensive and restricting its use, then one of the things that would happen very, very quickly is that a million things would start to happen at the local level. We would begin to see the revival in powerful ways of local economies as the logic of a world that ran on sun and wind would begin to draw us a little inward instead of the endless outward expansion that's come with the era of cheap fossil fuel. And that is even starting to happen. Thank you so much. Does that happen every time I drink? I do it again. If you're looking for, I've given you a bunch of bad statistics. Let me give you a good one. Last year, the USDA reported that for the first time in 150 years, the number of farms in the United States grew instead of shrunk. Okay? Nobody in this room, nobody's parents, nobody's grandparents, nobody's great-grandparents has ever lived in America where the number of farms is increasing. And that's remarkably good news. It's tiny at this point, that increase, and it's nowhere near where we need. It's not at the pace that we'll... But it's a sign, a kind of reminder of our possibilities of turning things around. And if we built that kind of world, the kind of world that's envisioned by things like the Oberlin Project, a world where much more local food and much more local commerce and much more local energy are all part of the mix, many, many things would happen. One of them is that we would produce less carbon dioxide, and that would be very good. Another of them would be that world would be more durable and resilient. It would be able to cope somewhat better with the changes that we've already caused and that we're not going to be able to prevent. We've already raised the temperature 1 degree, and the scientists tell us there's another degree in the pipeline from carbon we've already emitted. So it'd be much smarter to have a planet a little more resilient and able to withstand some of that, and local agriculture is a very good example of what I'm talking about. But it would also, and I think this is important to recognize as we talk about how difficult these shifts might be, it would also be a world that in many ways would just work better for human beings. I started writing about local economies and things a number of years ago when I saw an interesting data set. And it was, well, every year, one of the big American polling companies, the National Opinion Research Center, every year since the end of World War II, they've asked Americans, are you happy with your life? A pretty basic question. And the number of Americans who say, I'm very happy with my life, peaks in 1956 and goes steadily downhill, to the point where right now about a quarter of Americans will make that claim, okay? Which is very odd because our standard of living since 1956 has roughly trebled. We live in far bigger homes. We take vacations easily to places that people had never heard of. We can get any food that you can imagine at the supermarket. We have appliances for jobs that people hadn't even considered needed doing, 50 years ago. You can download any vaguely musical sound emitted anywhere on the planet, in a matter of seconds. We should be that we're not happy or sort of overcome with rapture is interesting. And The reason, I think, and the data kind of suggests this pretty strongly, is that the thing we lack compared to people 50 years ago is connection and community. One of the things that happens when you build a high fossil fuel society is not only that you pour a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere and destabilize the climate, but you also begin to destabilize human communities. What have Americans spent their money on since the end of World War II? Basically, on the project of building bigger houses further apart from each other. That's been how we've defined the American dream. And it's no wonder, then, that communities have begun to suffer, just almost mathematically, almost kind of out of rules of Brownian motion. You run into each other less often when you are marooned on your own half acre out someplace in the far distance, able to navigate only by car between one and the next. It's not just some fantasy that we're living like this. The average American eats half as many meals with friends or family or neighbors as they did 50 years ago. The average American has half as many close friends as they did 50 years ago. That is a very big change. If you had been sitting in that same seat 50 years ago, statistically, you would have had twice as many people with whom you were close. There are not enough iPods in the world to make up for that kind of loss, okay? Which is why it's so good to see that beginning of that kind of revival. The great thing about farmers markets is not that they're better for the environment, though clearly they are. The 5-mile tomato is better than the 2,000-mile tomato. It's not that they're better culinarily, though clearly I traveled 2,000 miles this week. I know how I feel. That's how the tomato feels also. The main reason they're better is because they're a different social construct. A couple of sociologists a few years ago followed shoppers, first around the supermarket, and then around the farmer's market. All of you have been to the supermarket. You know how it works. You walk in, you fall into a light fluorescent trance, you visit the Stations of the Cross around the perimeter of the market, that's it. Maybe you have the interesting credit versus debit discussion at the register. That when they followed shoppers around the farmer's market, on average, they were having 10 times more conversations per visit. All right? Not 10% more, 10 times more. You do not even need, the beginning statistics course here to recognize that 10 times more meets the test for statistical difference. This is a different world. And of course we like it, because that's where the only odd thing is that, people in college towns across America give themselves enormous credit for having invented this thing called the farmer's market. This is, how all human beings shopped for food until 50 years ago, and 80% of the world still does. Of course we like it. It's, who we are. It's what we've evolved with. And so it's enormous good news that things like the Oberlin Project are exemplars of this kind of world that we need very much and very quickly to rebuild, and on a scale that matters. There couldn't be better news, in a sense. And it's such good news that all I really want to do with my life is stay home in Vermont, where I live, and work on this stuff, because we have all kinds of great possibilities, and all my friends are doing it, and I love all the kind of work I get to do on agriculture and things. And yet, I've spent most of the last 4 or 5 years now pretty much in constant motion around the world. Been home, 40, 50, 60 days a year. And the reason is because doing this locally alone isn't going to get us where we need to go. Not only is it not going to scale up quickly enough to prevent climate change, okay, it's also, if it's all that we do, not going to work even in those places where we're doing it very well. That is to say, you can build the best local agricultural system in the world in this part of Ohio, and I have no doubt that you're capable of it and will do it. But if we let the climate get any more out of control, and it rains 30 days in a row, or it doesn't rain at all for 30 days, which are the fat curves of the tail that are getting fatter all the time, if it does either of those things, it doesn't matter how good a farmer you are, you're not going to grow food. Okay? So half the work got to be done close to home, but half of it has to be done on a kind of global and national level. And I got to tell you, in a sense, that's not as much fun and not as immediately satisfying. And I don't want you all to take it up, except that we need you to spend at least some of your energy doing it, helping in that struggle too, because it's the complete complement of the work that you're doing here close to home. So that's what I want to talk about for just a minute as I finish here.